Hi everyone, this is North and his books back one more time for my latest, essentially a vlog of my language learning experience. It's been about 20 weeks since I have previously posted one of these videos. Essentially, I moved. In fact, I moved twice in that period. And of course, I had a change of career. I now, in fact, work in the field of language learning, which means that I have a lot more time, to think about language learning and also to get even more, if possible, invested in it as a hobby and as a passion than before, since it is paying my rent now to a certain extent. And as a result, in fact, this series of videos that I've been making for now almost a year has to technically change its title, because before I had the series of videos entitled Journey to C2 Full Proficiency, as much as one can say with a language learning test, in 10 languages, including my native English. And in fact, now I have to change that title because I have branched out. I have a friend that I've had for a while who speaks a language that is not one of those 10 languages. And it's also a language that shouldn't be too difficult to learn given other languages that I know and given what language I'm coming from as a native tongue, English. This language is Bulgarian. So I decided I should put some effort into it. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. There was an additional motivator for this. It was the fact that Bulgarian is a language where if you go online and look for a tutor, it is not that expensive. So the language that I was learning before Bulgarian was Swedish. About a year ago or over a year ago, I had gotten to the point where I could read at a sort of almost intermediate level in Swedish, but I had never really spoken it. I just had a passive understanding of the language. And I realized, this is a good time this fall. I thought this around late August, to take my Swedish to the next level, to start to learn to speak, essentially by booking a number of lessons on italki. And this is great. This went very well, except for the fact that, of course, if you want to get good at speaking a language, you have to speak it a lot. And if I want to speak a language 5+ hours in a week with a tutor, that can get quite expensive. It can get quite difficult. And if you go through a language like Swedish, the cost of this can become almost prohibitive, or at least it can start to having an impact on your finances in general, because it's very hard, for example, to find a Swedish online tutor for less than $20 an hour. For 1 hour or 2 hours a week, that's really not a big deal. But if you start looking at speaking every day for an hour, then you're looking at something like $140 an hour, and that can become a decision that is harder to take, or at least it can be something that you become a little bit less comfortable with. So I learned Swedish. I spoke Swedish for, I wrote this down somewhere, I believe 27 hours between late August and early November, maybe the start of November. And I thought, okay, my Swedish has improved a decent amount, not to the level that it should be at, but I got somewhere. And I thought to myself, I want to get to 100 hours in a language to be able to say that I speak it at a decent level. Probably around 100 hours, at least if it's a European language. If this were Japanese, Arabic, Chinese, then certainly it would take far more than 100 hours. But for a language like Swedish, which is fairly similar to English, 100 hours of one-on-one speaking, I think, should be sufficient to get you to a solid upper intermediate level, especially if you have a strong basis in reading and listening to the language. But I didn't get there. Although I do have those 27 hours, they're not going to disappear, and I will go back to them at some point in the future. So I have transferred my energies over to Bulgarian. As of this day, the 7th of December, I've spoken about 5 hours in Bulgarian. I've found a couple of tutors that charge American $5 or $6 an hour. And this is obviously something that is much easier for me to do whenever. So I could have an hour in the morning, theoretically, do some work for my job, go to the gym, live my life, and then if I have time in the evening, I could fit in 45 minutes at 9 p.m. And the cost is so little that essentially it doesn't have a huge impact on me. I'm not going to start going to sleep worrying about how I'm going to pay for my Bulgarian lessons. So I'm lucky enough to have this, and I am at 5 hours so far. My goal is to keep going, to not get distracted by anything else, and to keep reading and learning vocabulary, and hopefully get myself to a solid intermediate level before I move on to another language. I have, at this moment, we are on a Tuesday. Between now and the end of the week, I already have 4 more hours booked. So I'll try to see where I'm at by the time I get to around 10 hours. Once I hit 10 hours, I'm going to try to make some kind of progress video just to show, since I have essentially no audience, this is mostly for myself, just to show myself where I'm at, and then to repeat that around 25 hours, then around maybe 50, 75, and 100 if I make it that far, just so I can then look back and say, okay, but how much progress did I really make after having spoken 10 hours and then going to 25 and going to 50 and so on. Of course, the goal of these progress videos were to have some kind of unscripted conversation, perhaps a recording with my tutor while I am in a lesson, if they agree to that, and to go from there. So that's where I am right now. Essentially, this whole idea of having 10 languages that I get very fluent in has sort of gone out the window. I still want to achieve a very high level of proficiency in each of those other languages. However, I have now added other languages into the mix, and at the very least, since we're only in our first year of this video series, maybe at one point I'll look back in 5 years, if YouTube still exists and I'm on week 280, and say to myself, okay, it was worth it, or maybe it wasn't worth it. So if this interests you, make sure to subscribe, and I'll have more posts like this. I'll be getting back to posting once a week now that I am set up in my new home. Ciao.